All right, let's do a self-assessment before we move on to the next subject. So number your paper 1 to 32. If you haven't got a paper, grab one. Hopefully you paused me and you're back with a paper and something with which to write. I didn't mention that. Hopefully that was implied. Okay, so for these first 16 items, they're true-false statements. So for items 1 through 16, you're just going to write down T or F for each of the statements. All right, so the first one, it bothers me to see someone in a restaurant eating messy food with his fingers. True or false? 2, seeing a cockroach in someone else's house doesn't bother me. 3, it bothers me to hear someone clear a throat full of mucus. 4, I think it is immoral for people to seek sexual pleasure from animals. 5, it would bother me to be in a science class and to see a human hand preserved in a jar. 6, I would go out of my way to avoid walking through a graveyard. 7, I never let any part of my body touch the toilet seat in public restrooms. 8, even if I was hungry, I would not drink a bowl of my favorite soup if it had been stirred by a used but thoroughly washed fly swatter. 9, I might be willing to try eating monkey meat under some circumstances. 10, it would bother me to see a rat run across my path in a park. 11, if I see someone vomit, it makes me sick to my stomach. 12, I think homosexual activities are immoral. 13, it would not upset me at all to watch a person with a glass eye take the eye out of the socket. 14, it would bother me tremendously to touch a dead body. 15, I probably would not go to my favorite restaurant if I found out that the cook had a cold. 16, it would bother me to sleep in a nice hotel room if I knew that a man had died of a heart attack in that room the night before. All right, so those are the first 16. They're all true, false. If you need to pause it and go through more carefully, do that now. Otherwise, let's go ahead and move to the next 16 items. Now you're going to be using this rating scale. From 0, it's not disgusting at all. 1, it's slightly disgusting. And 2, it's very disgusting. Now, the author's note, if you think it's bad or unpleasant, but not what you would call disgusting, then give it a 0. I mean, it doesn't have to be a pleasant thing to get a 0. It just has to be not something that you would call disgusting. All right, 17. You see someone put ketchup on vanilla ice cream and eat it. 18. You see maggots on a piece of meat in an outdoor garbage pail. 19. While you are walking through a tunnel under a railroad track, you smell urine. 20. You hear about a 30-year-old man who seeks sexual relationships with 80-year-old women. 21. You see someone accidentally stick a fishing hook through his finger. 22. Your friend's pet cat dies and you have to pick up the dead body with your bare hands. 23. You take a sip of soda and then realize that you drank from the glass that an acquaintance of yours had been drinking from. 24. A friend offers you a piece of chocolate shaped like dog do. 25. You are about to drink a glass of milk when you smell that it is spoiled. 26. You are walking barefoot on concrete and you step on an earthworm. 27. You see a bowel movement left unflushed in a public toilet. 28. You hear about an adult woman who has sex with her father. 29. You see a man with his intestines exposed after an accident. 30. You accidentally touch the ashes of a person who has been cremated. 31. You discover that a friend of yours changes underwear only once a week. 32. As part of a sex education class, you are required to inflate a new, unlubricated condom using your mouth. All right, so if you need to pause to make sure that you've got solid scoring for all 16 of these, go ahead and do that. All right, hopefully you're back or you're ready to go, because now we're going to talk about how to score the Disgust scale. So this scale was created in 1994 by Jonathan Haidt and colleagues. The goal is to calculate how many questions out of 32 were answered in the disgust sensitive way. So first, put a dot next to questions 2, 9, and 13, since these questions must be reversed. So they were phrased in a non-disgust reaction way. So we're going to reverse these. So what you're going to do is count up the number of T's that you have for all the questions except for 2, 9, and 13. Then you're going to look at numbers 2, 9, and 13, and any of those that you gave an F, you're going to add that to your total that you've got so far, right? Because they're going to count as T's. Confusing? No, that's not confusing. We love a good confusing personality scale, don't we? So count up the number of T's for everything except for questions 2, 9, and 13. And then looking just at 2, 9, and 13, if any of those have an F, add them as if they were T's to your total score. That's going to be your score on part 1. So there are 16 items. If you gave everything besides 2, 9, and 13 a T, and then on 2, 9, and 13 you gave them Fs, the total possible score you could have on this section is 16. If everything was an F, and on 2, 9, and 13 you had given those T's, then you'd have a 0 on this part of the scale. So it can range from 0 to 16, in other words. All right, now turning your attention to 17 through 32, you're going to just add up the ratings that you gave on the, I just noticed something that I typed myself, and now I realize that there's something wrong with my next thing I'm going to tell you. Okay, we'll deal with that next. So add up all the ratings that you gave on questions 17 through 32. Once you've added that up, divide it by 2. Hold on real quick. I'm going to fix this real quick while you're adding. Normally I would tell you to pause me, but I messed up. There we go. All right. So add up all the ratings you gave for 17 through 32. Divide that total by 2. That's going to be your score on part 2. So the ratings were 0, 1, or 2, right? So if you gave everything on that on part 2 a 2, that would be 64 divided by 64. 16 times, it'd be 32 divided by 2, and so you'd end up with 16 as your max score on this, right? Of course, if you gave everything a 0, dividing by 2 would still be 0, right? Because you can't really divide 0 by anything because it's 0. So that's the computation. If you gave everything a 1, right, then you'd have an 8 on this part of it. Most of you probably gave some things zeros, some things 1s, and some things 2s, so you're going to have a mix. All right. So now what you're going to do is add up the scores for those 2 different parts, and that's going to give you a total score on this test that could be somewhere between 0 and 32. If nothing was disgusting on parts 1 or 2 to you, you're going to have a 0, right? If everything was disgusting to you, you're going to have a 32. The average score for American adult samples is approximately 16, right? It's a little lower for men, a little higher for women, but approximately 16. So most people, some things are disgusting and some things aren't. Higher numbers indicate that you're more disgust sensitive than average. So if you're male and your score is 20, you're a little bit more disgust sensitive than the average male. If you're a female and your disgust score is 12, then you're less disgust sensitive than the average female. We don't have any like hard and fast cutoffs for this particular scale, and in fact, I'm showing you the 32 item version of the scale that was initially developed. They've honed it down to about 25 items now, and they're still kind of working on it, trying to really drill down what factors go into disgust. All right, so Haidt and his colleagues found a negative correlation between disgust and sensation seeking, and a pretty decent sized correlation, right? Remember, correlation coefficients can run from 0 to 1. They can be positive or negative. This is a 0.46. That's a pretty strong correlation for any kind of psychological characteristic, and then it's negative. So people who are higher in disgust are less sensation seeking. People who are lower in disgust are more sensation seeking. So if you are a person who really likes to try new things and you're willing to eat new foods and try different kinds of drugs or different kinds of music, or that's what's encapsulated in sensation seeking. So there's that inverse relationship between disgust and sensation seeking. And then we again have a pretty good strong correlation. I would call this probably a moderate correlation between disgust and then fear of death. And it's a positive one. So the more disgust that a person shows, the higher their fear of death score tends to be. So those things tend to go together. It shows that disgust might be, and this is going to be a pretty consistent theme here, disgust might be sort of adaptive in the way that it helps us to avoid things that could be dangerous to us, that could, shorten our lives. It could be helping us to avoid rotten food that would give us food poisoning and could potentially kill us, or pathogens that could infect us and kill us, or um, situations that would be really dangerous that could harm us. And so you can see why disgust and fear of death might be correlated. Now, some other researchers, Tiber and colleagues, in 2011 found some sex differences in disgust. And Haidt had already reported that males show a little lower disgust score than females do. What Tiber and colleagues found is that women scored somewhat higher than men in moral disgust. So attitudes about like shoplifting, cheating, things like that. Women display more moral disgust towards that than men, but just somewhat. They show somewhat higher disgust for pathogens like mold on leftovers or seeing cockroaches, things like that, than males do. And then much higher disgust than men for sexual things like females tend to express greater disgust towards oral sex or anal sex or things like that. So there are sex differences where women overall are showing more disgust, and then on specific things, some of them like much higher sexual disgust, somewhat higher pathogens, somewhat higher moral disgust. So some differences between the sexes on those things. So how do we express disgust? Okay, well, here's a guy holding a disgusting, dirty diaper, right? And look at the face that is on that, the expression that's on his face. The nose is pulled up, the eyebrows are kind of down. You see the chin is kind of pulled up and kind of dimply, right? It's kind of like the corners of the mouth are down a little bit. But look what happens when we take that exact same face. They photoshopped it very poorly onto this man's body. Now he's got a balled up fist. Notice that it kind of looks like anger. So when it's a dirty diaper, that facial expression denotes disgust. When it's a clenched fist, you would interpret that exact same facial expression as indicating anger. I would argue that in both cases, it kind of looks a little bit ambiguous to me. It doesn't completely look like disgust on the left, and it doesn't completely look like anger to me, but maybe it's context that's messing me up. I'm not sure. But the facial expression of disgust, we can agree, involves wrinkling the nose, right? Pulling up the labial nasal muscles so that you're pulling up the nose. And some people argue that that's a way to kind of close your nose a little bit. A lot of times in the face of disgust, there might be an odor with it. And so we kind of close up our nose through that posture. Our lips are closed and our mouth is kind of like they're thinned out. So it's like if you're in a disgusting situation, maybe the disgusting thing might fly and get in your mouth, right? I mean, you can think of, if you've ever watched Dirty Jobs, there have been a lot of times where like, I hope your mouth is closed in what you're doing, because that stuff could be going in your mouth. And if you're cleaning a septic system or a sewer, you don't want those things flying in your mouth. So some of the parts of the facial expression of disgust make a lot of sense as far as like being kind of protective against the very thing that you're disgusted by, right? Sometimes we show that same facial expression in, like, let's say, moral disgust, and clearly nothing's flying in our face or going to go up our noses, and so we use the same facial expression even when it's not motivated by the same kinds of potential stimuli. So again, it's one of those examples of an emotion having like an adaptive quality to it, and then also maybe not as adaptive. All right, I've got a couple of videos that I want you to watch. This first one talks about like why we might have disgust as a response and how it looks and stuff like that. And then the next one kind of builds on something that's mentioned in the first video and talks a little bit more about, like political differences in levels of disgust. So I want you to watch those two videos and we'll come back and talk afterwards. So I'll see you after that.